Oh, that was fun. So when I was asked to come and give this, of course, in the traditional way, I thought, okay, well, I'll do a presentation. So I went and looked up a lot of stuff. So my name is Cory Knobel. I am the...
What a hand for Dr. Knobel!
So I'm relatively new to the UC Irvine campus. I came at the beginning of last winter quarter from the University of Pittsburgh. And before that, I was at the University of Michigan doing my graduate work. But I'm in the Department of Informatics. And then I also run the Evoke Lab, which is just downstairs from the room next to us. So I'm going to talk to you about doing multidisciplinary work, because I have been doing multidisciplinary work pretty much my whole life. So starting with undergrad, for some reason, I always found myself drawn to not traditional disciplines, but the spaces in between them. So at this point, I probably have about 20 years of having to think about how do you bridge between different things. I think it's really fun and really interesting, but it's not easy. And so there's some things to be aware of. So I want to give you a little bit of insight into how to do multidisciplinary work and making it a really good experience. Because one thing you'll find is if you start doing research on multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity, the literature is filled with examinations of where it went wrong. Don't be one of those papers. Oh wait, it's at the very end of the presentation. I love it when technology fails me. So what is multidisciplinary work? So one thing to know is there is a difference between what we call multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and transdisciplinary. But the main deal is that multidisciplinary is when you have different perspectives from different domains, and when you look at the work, you can see that each domain contributed something, but it's all separate and separable, and you can still identify that was what the economist did, and that's what the computer engineer did, and that's what the biologist did. And those are very clear in the work. Interdisciplinarity is when it starts working together and, so that's kind of coordinating different views. Interdisciplinarity is where you're really starting to work at the intersection of stuff and develop kind of new ideas. But it's kind of an intermediate state where, okay, you can still tell that it's the product of different inputs. So for example, we have a field called behavioral economics that rose at the intersection of psychology and economics. So you can kind of see things in the way they're named. And then finally, you have transdisciplinarity, when things are really integrated and you're starting to develop new ideas that are, they're not like either of the constituent parents or the things that are inputs, but they really look new. So I would say that if you look historically, things like neuroscience have become true transdisciplines because it's its own thing now, and the ideas that arise from it are natural to neuroscience, where it used to be physical psychology in psychology departments and neurology in medical schools. So they're realizing what kind of work are you doing and what kind of work do you want to be doing? Because these are very, very different things. So think about what are you coordinating, what are you collaborating on, and what are you truly integrating and synthesizing. So why do you do this? So in terms of multidisciplinarity, you're all here as MVP students. What is it about the MD part that is attractive to you rather than just doing a project? She got you to talk. So, yeah, why multidisciplinary when you could be in your home department and you could just do the stuff you're going to be rewarded for? Why take the risk of doing this weird multidisciplinary thing?
Because sometimes it gets dull when you're on the same discipline doing the same thing that someone else has already done. And I don't know, what feels like to me is like someone from, like the ideas from another department just like adds a little spark, creativity into your own work. Because you get a new perspective in.
This is part of the learning. Learning new stuff is fun, and there's all kinds of stuff in other departments that you can learn. This is really interesting and fun.
Well, I think of research is something that's trying to come up with something that's new. So with the technology that's available today, the cost of being able to get this cross-department kind of talk going and getting resources and material from other labs or other disciplines is much lower. So now and at the same time, the field of combining two things that normally were separate would be very new. So it's like this combination of low cost and a lot of opportunity.
Yes, so there's opportunity and there's efficiency in doing these things, especially from a resource point of view. But even, I think, kind of deeper than that is, all right, think about the way that we as the university and the academy organize ourselves, right? We have physical and natural sciences, we have social sciences, we have humanities, all this kind of stuff. So think about the rest of the world outside of the academy. Who else organizes their thought that way? Nobody. We're the only ones. And I will tell you this. Interesting problems in the world are infuriatingly indifferent to the way that we choose to think about stuff and organize ourselves. There isn't an interesting problem in the world that is going to stand up and say, I'm a sociology problem, so all you sociologists, over here. No. Interesting problems in the world call for all kinds of perspectives and all kinds of expertise to come together, but the way that we've institutionally arranged ourselves makes that tough. So being a part of something like the MDP program is why you are actually at the most interesting place on campus.
We can also give a plug for informatics because it seems very natural for me to be part of MDP because the Department of Informatics is, that's why I came here. That's why I chose UC Irvine and that specific program because it is interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary by its nature. And sometimes it's hard to define yourself that way because people don't know what it is that you do. You have to spend a lot of time and effort explaining it or just point to your work. But it seems very much in line with what we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's exactly the same reason I was drawn towards information science and informatics because, yeah, it's at these crossroads of a number of disciplines, so you get to ask interesting questions that relate to the world. So things that make this fun, and you've said some of these things. You can communicate your ideas so other people outside of your head, outside of your department, can understand them. Well, these are things that are challenging. It's sometimes challenging to agree on what your work is going to produce because we have these different ideas coming from our training and from our disciplines, it means we've been trained into thinking different things about what is good work, what is a product of that type of work, even down to the level of what is valid or what is verifiable. We all have these different ways of knowing. So one of the challenges of multidisciplinary work is getting everybody to agree on what exactly is it we're doing. And finally, and since you guys have self-selected to be here, you are probably least likely to fall into this category, but when you work with departments and other people who haven't opted this, realize that you may run into people who don't think about cross-disciplinarity and think that, okay, well, my view of the world is fine. It's not good for me, so why should I think about that? I'm sure you've never run into anyone like that, right? But so, yeah, so respecting that, okay, I know I don't see the world the way you do, and it's going to take me some effort and time and talking to you to understand why you see the world that way, but we can develop that expertise in communicating with each other so I can make an informed decision about whether I think you're on track or whether, actually, no, that won't work, even now that I understand it. But being able to become comfortable with that. But what makes it fun? You get to experience views outside of your own stuff. You get to create products and projects and artifacts that multiple people will enjoy and learn from and can bear the type of knowledge that you want to get across. And just creating new stuff. This is design. This is the fun part of creating things the world hasn't seen before. This has been going on for a long time, but it's our motivation. We like to create new stuff. It's why we research, it's why we build. All right, so I feel like I wouldn't be a good professor if I didn't actually talk about, well, what do we know from research? This isn't just me talking about, this is what I think about multidisciplinarity. We actually do research on this stuff. So one great project where a lot of what we know comes from a set of projects at Harvard Graduate School of Education called Project Zero, where Howard Gardner of emotional intelligence fame and his team looked at a number of different high-performance interdisciplinary groups and did long-term ethnographic studies of them. And what they found is, one, the things that they collaboratively use for tools, for sense making, for all this kind of stuff. It wasn't just a set that was handed to them. They had to negotiate with each other what they needed to use and what was useful to them over time. So for example, choosing a coding language, okay, it may work for one person in the group or a couple people in the group, but the negotiation of whether that's going to work for the whole project actually takes some time. So one of the things to know about, I'll just call it X-disciplinary work that covers multi, inter, and trans. All of this stuff takes development time. It's not something that you just jump into and it automatically works like a well-oiled machine. 2, language is really important. I actually think language, and my research points to the fact that language is possibly the most important thing for successfully doing interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary work. Because it's actually not about disciplines, it's real people who communicate with each other, real researchers who have to spend time together and talk to each other in order to get the work done. All research work is done by people, so we have to focus on what do those people do. Really good teams spend time, especially at the front, at the beginning of a project, doing the hard work of saying, okay, we're going to do a project about X. Well, what does X mean to you? And what does X mean to you? And really surfacing not just the words that you're going to talk to, but the entire disciplinary commitments that you have behind that word. And I'll talk about that a little more in a second. And then finally, again, there are different standards of what constitutes good work, what constitutes participation. There are some fields, especially, and I've worked with some people in pure mathematics. The culture of pure mathematics is, okay, you talk about some stuff, but then you go away and you work at your whiteboard alone and do stuff, and you only come back when you have a clean, elegant proof. Other stuff, design work, messy. You are in there fighting with each other all the time, and you have these epic battles for whiteboard space. Things like that. So there's these different cultural standards. Another project on the Digital Libraries Initiative, which was a very big NSF project in the mid-90s, but it was a study done of these different institutions who all took part in this project to build what's now the fundamental architecture for digital libraries that we all use. Some of the major things to come out of this project were Google. Google started in this project. Things like the way, have you ever used the search interface for the library here? The fact that you can do a search just on the author field, or just on the title field, the XML structures, came out of this project. A lot of what we use for GPS. So this was a really important, a big project, but not all the projects were successful. These were all highly multidisciplinary. But by doing an analysis of the group work, it was found that the parts of the project that failed not because the technology didn't work, but because the different groups of scientists didn't know how to communicate with each other about what they were collaboratively building. This was another example where they would come together for meetings every 2 weeks, and they would talk about what was going on, but then they'd all go back to their departments and build things. And this went on for 3 years, and at the end of 3 years, they brought all the parts together and nothing fit. Why? Because even common terms, so again, they were building a digital library. Each of these different groups understood what it was to be a library differently, what data is, what users are. And this is why it didn't fit together. So the more successful projects out of those 6, sometimes this is the way to get started, is they actually had a central point of control who was kind of coordinating those views and knew when to ask, okay, you're saying data over here and turning these things in, and you're saying data over here and turning these things in, but they're not fitting together, stop. We're hammering this out. Those were the successful ones. So in doing multidisciplinary projects, the project manager role, or kind of a central coordination point, does become very important in a lot of places. That could be one of your faculty members, especially if they're very oriented towards interdisciplinary, but it can also be someone in your group who just has a good rapport with talking with everybody and kind of getting at what you mean by stuff. And jump in with questions anytime, by the way. But so these are some of the things that we know from actual research about what makes successful multidisciplinary work. And where do things often fall down? And it's usually not in the technical parts, it's in the social parts. So how do you set up your team for success? First, I would say these are the most important 3 things. Communicate with each other, document everything, and have fun. I mean, this is supposed to be fun. If it's not fun, it's probably not worth doing. Go and find something fun. But a couple things to remember. These are easy to forget, but these are your friends and colleagues. You're spending time with them, so enjoy that. You know, get to know them as people. Second, there are probably very few things that qualify as a true level 10 MDP crisis that necessitates calling and texting your professor at 8 o'clock on a Friday evening. I've had this happen. Someone tracked down my phone number. And by 9 o'clock, there was an email to the dean of how unresponsive the professor is. But really, this isn't defusing a bomb. You know, this is a fun project. So be sure you can take anything with a grain of salt and just realize, you know, all right, a project like this is not like executing the steps of a program. There's going to be weird stuff. There's going to be turns off the road. And in the end, what you thought you were going to have as a product in the end may actually not be. And that's okay sometimes too. You do have to commit to something at the end and explain how you got there. But I have never been on a project where the final product looked exactly what we thought it was going to at the beginning. Never. So let go of the idea that at this level, a multidisciplinary project is like an engineering problem, where you know where A is, and you know where B is, and you design the most efficient way to get from A to B. No. This is a journey. Be playful. Play. Just, write that on a Post-it and stick it on your monitor. Play. Because if you're not playing, play is the state of creativity. Play is the state of being generative and being generous and compassionate about yourself and your work. Play. Prototype fast. So don't be afraid to just get it out of your head in some form, because then you can work with it in ways, one, that you can't work with it just in your head. You know, your head is not a compiler. The computer's actually a compiler. You'll know where it fails. Second, once you get it out of your head, you're not the only one working on it. You can actually work on it with other people. So do that as fast as you can. And if it's going to fail, you'll realize it faster and you can recover from it faster. This is something people, actually, I think that computer science and computer engineering does way better than social sciences and humanities, is there's a culture of getting stuff down and failing and fixing fast. You know, in humanities, okay, you write a paper, you can't really compile a paper, you have to wait until you get it back. My undergraduate was in humanities, so I know exactly how precious we can be about our words. Too precious. Finally, document everything you do all the way along, and I will tell you why in a minute. But, oh, that went a little too fast. Techniques for integrating your work. One, use a lot of analogies. You know, oh, this is like that. This is part of the thing that helps you communicate across those disciplinary boundaries. And just keep iterating through until you find an analogy that resonates and works. Also, talking through metaphors. There's this great book by George Lakoff called Metaphors We Live By that explains how we construct these complex things that communicate across boundaries. Creating compound concepts. Wow, that worked well. And building complex and multi-causal explanations. I mean, really, this is part of the playfulness, is being to think through these different spaces and combine your ideas with those of other people who see the world differently, and where they link up to create these kind of complex chains of explanation. You know, for anything that you're trying to explain, you should run through a whole bunch of different models, even just sketching out, you know, bubble and stick diagrams of how does this work? What are the different ways this could work? Checks and balances, making sure the stuff that everybody is producing is being put in front of the group at major milestones, so you keep yourselves accountable. And you keep yourselves accountable for communicating openly and honestly. Finally, bridging this explanation-action gap, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. It's easy to look at something and read something and say, okay, yeah, I get that. it's a completely different thing to put it into practice. You actually have to do things. There is a clinical psychologist named Allison Miller in Chicago who works, her practice, she works exclusively with doctoral students and researchers, and especially on the roadblocks that they have in writing. One of the things that she said to me once was, you know, working with academics, cognitive psychology doesn't work with them very well. You know why? Because they're smart. They're already cognitive about what they do. She said, I never have a researcher or an academic come to me unable to articulate, I'm procrastinating. I don't have to tell them they're procrastinating. They know. Or, yeah, my dissertation, I'm being really avoidant about it. I mean, they know this stuff. It's not the cognition, it's the behavior. So realizing that, you know, some of these activities, and especially some fields, are really good theoretically. They're really strong. They're really perfect for learning how to talk through stuff. And then other fields have much more of a tradition of actually, the rubber is hitting the road and we're going to build something now. Realize what these are and when are the right times to switch back and forth between these two modalities to keep things moving forward. There's absolutely a time to talk about theory. You know, there's a time to talk through stuff, and then there's a time to just, you know, get some sort of seatbelt that has a timer on it and will not let you up until you have finished doing what you're doing. So, you know, you need to figure out how to bridge that gap between explaining things and then bringing real things into the world. All right, how to know if you're on track? Because checks midway through are good. So in terms of working in multidisciplinary groups, there's a 2010 paper by Miller, but describes these are the 4 stages that they found in examining multidisciplinary groups. You start out with mutual ignorance of, I've heard about you economists. I don't trust you because I don't know about you. I trust economists now. Stereotyping is kind of the, oh, I know how you engineers are. So you have this baggage and these assumptions about that they're not their person, they're an avatar of a field. You know, and all of the assumptions about, you know, biologists are like this, or, you know, how many times, I mean, in informatics we make fun of this all the time. Computer scientists don't think about the social. Well, actually, you know, many computer science and engineering departments don't have classes about the social, so that's, you know, that's a stereotype, and it's changing, but realize what your own stereotypes are when you're playing them out. Perspective taking, this is the next step of, you're not what that person is, but you know enough about it to say, okay, you know, I think that the botanist on my group would probably say this. You do this a lot in undergraduate philosophy courses when professors ask you, well, you know, how would Kant explain blah, blah, blah. This is perspective taking. This is really good, not just for your MDP projects, but life in general. Being able to anticipate how people are going to react lets you play the chess game further out. Finally, merging. This is, okay, you know what? I get that I'm in X department, but you know what, so what? That's just a name. I actually do this kind of work, and this is a merging of my experience, the experiences that I've had with other people, and just kind of this, you know, I'm a researcher. I remember I was in a seminar once at Michigan, and the very first day, there were 13 of us in the class, and the professor asked us all to go around and say, you know, where we were from, what we did. The class, I was the only information person. The class was half people from the strategy department in business school and half from the School of Education. And it was really funny because I went first, and you know, I'm an unapologetic interdisciplinarian. You know. And I went first, and I'm from the School of Information. And then everyone else said, oh, you know, I'm from the strategy department at the business school. And they would kind of look around and they'd whisper, but I'm really an interdisciplinary. Like they were coming out. So I think more people are there's the name on the door, right? You know, Department of Statistics. But then there's what you do and who you are. And most of us, I think now, really at our core, are interested in more than this narrow set of what a field tells us what to do. So, merging. That's where you want to get to. The practical stuff of knowing that you're on track. This has less to do with multidisciplinarity and just really good check-ins. One, are people showing up? You know, people don't show up to stuff they're losing interest in. So be aware of when you're showing up, be aware of when your colleagues are showing up, and find out what's really going on. Set out project milestones. Be very explicit about these things. They can change, but have them down. Have these intermediate steps to work towards, and be really honest about, are we meeting these? Because if denial will derail any project. Really. Regular communication with your project advisors, because while all this is fun, you actually are going to have to turn something out, and your project advisors are really the ones guiding you and can give you a lot of expertise. So make sure after every meeting with your advisor that your advisor, just like you're learning how to speak each other's language, your advisor may actually have another language, and you need to learn and teach. I mean, you need to teach them the vocabulary culture that you're developing in your group as you work, and make sure that they understand what you're doing, because they can't really advise you if they don't. So before you leave meetings, make sure that your advisor is able to reflect back to you where they think you are, and that you agree with their assessment. And second, a list of action items that you're going to get done before the next time you meet with them. And this is just good group project management stuff. Finally, how do you tell the world about what you're doing? Because you're doing stuff at these crossroads, you're working on really interesting problems that people should want to know about. So remember what I said before about documenting everything? Here is why. All of these analogies that you work through, even the ones that didn't work for you, might work for someone else. That may be the thing that gets the light bulb to go off for that person that you meet, while standing in line at Wendy's, who you never know, might be in a position to fund something, or yeah. So keep track of all these analogies and metaphors, because these get spun off into your narratives. Keep regular notes. Don't throw anything away. One thing that I see a lot of people do is they'll write something. Oh, this isn't right. This isn't what I wanted to do. Highlight, delete. Throw away your delete key. Just save it. Save it in a file. Just append it to some file of stuff that's intermediate product that is never going to make it into a paper because I'm horrified by it. I have a very long file of those. But it tells you where you win. Even if only to tell you, here's why I didn't go down that road, so I never have to go down it again. It's energy to recreate paths that you've already been down that don't lead anywhere. So keep regular notes, keep memos, photograph stuff. I mean, how many of you have a smartphone? How many of you own a camera? Okay, someone in your group will have some of these things. Just snap pictures shamelessly. You can go through them later. But don't do shameful pictures. There's a difference. But you take videos of stuff, photograph stuff, just pull web pages, take screenshots, intermediate processes, because you can turn these all into products later. They feed into the reports that you're going to write. They become parts of web pages. People love visual stuff. Be excited. Just ask yourself every time you start working on this, do I like this project? Not do I like the activity I'm doing now, because we all have to do things that we don't like in the moment. But am I really excited about this question? Yeah, be excited about that. And sometimes being excited about it is an explicit choice. I'm going to be excited about this for 10 weeks. Or, whatever. Choose to do that. You're going to need to tell other people about your multidisciplinary project, because they're awesome. But remember, telling about your project is not about the story you need to hear. It's not about making yourself feel good about this project. It is about telling other people, and part of that is figuring out where are they coming from. A good skill of interdisciplinarian is very quickly reading people, picking up on the vocabulary words they use, asking them first, well, where do you come from? What do you do? And then being able to quickly pivot your story to address the types of things they might be interested in, or the hooks that are going to be into what they can do. Because every time you tell someone about your project, especially if you find out they have some resource or something that can move it forward, you want to be able to ask for that resource at the end of the talk. Finally, remember the same challenges as you approach them in your group work about communicating and negotiating those key words that may, if you don't attend to them, derail stuff. It's going to be even more important with other people because the average person on the street or somebody in the department may actually be completely unfamiliar with the terms that you've come up with. So a good thing to do is, before you send this out into the world, or very regularly, check with people who are not you about, oh, here's what we're doing. What's not making sense to you? Pilot that with trusted friends and trusted people to learn how to talk about your work outside of the MVP. Judith Olson, who's a senior faculty member in informatics, when we were at Michigan together, said something beautiful, and I will always remember it, of why we do this. The greatest joy in doing original research is being the first person on the planet to know something, and you get to decide how the world is going to find out about it. Right? That's an immense amount of power. And I mean, this is that moment in research that makes it all worth it. That you realize it works that way, and I'm the only one who knows right now. I think we're desensitized to it because we see it in movies all the time, but really, when it happens to you for real, it's amazing. So, have all those things in place to be able to tell the world about it because you've been collecting it, because you have the analogies and metaphors and narratives. And then on a more practical level, how do you get it out there? Okay, Facebook it. I mean, we're all shameless Facebookers, right? So just put it up there. Tweet about it. Hashtags are free. Choose a hashtag for your project. Get it out there. Combine it with other hashtags that will be retweeted. Make a webpage about it. Most importantly, because we are in the academy and this is what we reward, for better or worse, write about it. You have to write about it. Write every day. If nothing else, just take 15 minutes a day and write about, here's where the project is. Swear to God. It'll add up over time and you will have tons and tons of stuff. And it helps you think about it.
Is it appropriate to ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
I need your help on something.
Okay.
So a few years ago, we did a survey assessing undergraduate research experience. We're talking about undergraduate research, not multidisciplinary. And there were so many improvements that the faculty felt the students are experiencing. And there's one area that they noticed is experiencing the least level of improvement,
Okay.
which is the ability for the students to accept different opinions. So, people who think differently, live differently, etc. How do we overcome that?
Well,
Because that really speaks to the core
yeah.
of multidisciplinary teams.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that part of the thing about the structure of a multidisciplinary program is getting at one dimension of that. But the problem of developing as a human, developing as a person, that's very multidimensional.
Or a society.
That's a cultural and societal and generational thing. So I mean, we could certainly make progress, I think, in this in talking about the categories of disciplines. I mean, this kind of relates back to how do we embrace and manage diversity. Diversity is highly dimensional, and it depends on which corner of the world you're looking at and how they categorize and break up the world. Our classification systems have immense power over us. So, the fact that we identify certain categories, that means that we break up the world in that entire way. There's this other part of classification theory called residual categories, which is what don't we talk about? When you decide not to talk about something and leave that out, it's incredibly hard for it to assert itself.
And here's another observation, if I may. The concept, when we started this program, multidisciplinary design program, if you analyze the data, the type of students and faculty were attracted to, we are addressing every diversity, So it's attracting diversity, it's nourishing diversity.
Right.
So I'm wondering, with the concept to address the problem that I raised earlier, would it be to promote more?
Right, so I think one of the questions is who's not there?
Right.
And why?
Right. And how do we break this sort of, we as individuals sometimes need to be more accepting of people who look different.
Well, and I think that this is, this is an area where, for example, people coming out of sociology and anthropology, people specifically who do ethnographic work. And sometimes it's the hard work of going and spending time in those communities and really learning at the ground level of what are the deep structures that prevent them from doing that or that don't motivate them to do that. Why is a really tough question. And sometimes you have to really dig in and spend time there to find out. That may be an approach to it. But it's, research is hard. It's especially hard when you're trying to suss out the negative definitions. Who's not there? What's not happening? Why isn't this doing something? It's always easier to measure metrics around what is there. It's very difficult to determine what's not. So that's what makes it a hard question. And I think I'm always fascinated by those questions of what's not there. But I have learned over time that those are sticky, and our methodologies are a little bit resistant to them. Yeah, it was a perfect time to ask a question because that was really the last part of the content. These are some hints on how to do multidisciplinary work, how to make a really good, rewarding experience. Because I think that multidisciplinary work is really at the core of all interesting work. And it's really rewarding. It's very fun. You meet people who are not like you, which that's what pushes you to grow and think differently and come up with those new exciting things. So, other questions? Oh, and by the way, so we have an interdisciplinary laboratory downstairs called Evoke, which is emerging values, ontologies, and knowledge expression. And what we do is look at a couple things. One, how do human and social values get inserted into the design process of information systems and technologies just as importantly as technical requirements? So how do you design for social justice? How do you design for emancipation? How do you design for these things? And what does it mean to embed those things in technology from the beginning? One is, how are the knowledge products of the academy changing? The traditional book or academic journal article, that's just one way of many to express knowledge. It's the way that we privilege, but it's not necessarily always the best way. So how do we think and design these new knowledge-bearing products with the advancing technologies that we have in ways that really get our points across better? Sometimes an infographic, a really well-done infographic, can make you understand relationships among things far better than 20 pages of text. So how do we develop an academic culture and an institutional culture that recognizes and rewards and fosters these new forms of knowledge? So those are two of the main things. And we also have a program called Design by Youth, which is working with younger kids to teach them design thinking and technological skills so that they approach question asking and answering differently, and with that ability to prototype fast, fail fast, recover fast. So we would love to have you guys come into the lab and take part in projects. Through the MDP is one major way. I think we have 2 MDP projects through the lab. But we have projects going on all the time. So stop by, see us. We're open from 12 to 3 every day. All right.
Very cool.
One hand.